I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're a returning viewer, it's so nice to see you again. And if you're a new viewer, I'm so glad you found my little corner of the internet. You can expect a lot of pretty but practical projects and cool muted colors with some form of embellishment. I record in two different styles, and today is a project snapshot style, which means I will only be talking about my works in progress, but I tend to go into a lot of depth, so they're usually pretty long anyway. I have both my co-hosts on the couch. This little puppy is down in my lap, and Moth is coming over as well. Moth is a cat, in case you couldn't tell from the tail. I guess I have my camera set up so that you guys can't see them. Sorry about that. But yeah, so everyone is situated, and let's get started. First up, because it was closest in my basket, are the 4th times the charm leg warmers. And I have almost finished the first one. All I need to do is bind off. I finished the last of the cuff this morning, and I'm kind of debating how I'm going to do the bind off, because most of it is 1x1 twisted rib, which means that I would usually do a sewn invisible bind off, but then there's this section right here which is not 1x1 ribbing. So I'm not sure. I've never tried the invisible sewn bind off, which is a form of grafting on it. I don't know if I could just do the purl stitch setup multiple times and have that work. The other thing I could do is do a different bind off for this section, like knit to here, do a bind off, and then cut my yarn and do a sewn bind off for all the other 1x1 stitches. So if you have any opinions on that, feel free to share them. And this is Quince & Company Lark, which is their 100% wool yarn in the colorway Bird's Egg. And if you're a returning viewer, you know that this yarn has seen a whole lot of projects. First, I received it for Christmas 3 years ago, maybe? And I knit it up into a little jacket that was really neat, and I like that pattern, and I love the yarn, but the combination just didn't end up getting much wear in my closet. So I frogged it, and then earlier this summer, I re-knit it into a just more normal cardigan, and then I realized that I just don't like wearing worsted weight cardigans, so I frogged it again, and I started doing like a winter accessory set. So I finished the mittens, and now I'm doing matching leg warmers. And the mittens are called 3rd times the charm because they've been knit 3 times. And so I started to call these leg warmers 3rd times the charm, but then I made a mistake. I knit an entire leg warmer without trying it on, and rather than following the pattern as written, I decided to put a lot more negative ease into it because I want to make sure that they stay up. But I've knit one other pair of leg warmers and multiple pairs of knee-high socks, and the first pair of leg warmers I knit, I didn't worry that much about negative ease, and they only stay up if I wear them over tights. Whereas all my knee-high socks, I put a lot of negative ease into, and they stay up whether I wear them bare-legged or with tights. What I didn't think about was the fact that this has a lot of ribbing in it, which that first pair of leg warmers I knit does not have any ribbing, and it's a lace pattern. And this is twisted stitches, which pull in a lot anyway. And so when I got to the bottom of the first leg warmer and I finally tried it on, I realized that even though it technically fit, like it didn't feel tight, the stitches were stretched out pretty much this much. It looked really not good. It looked like I was hulking out of the leg warmers. So I pulled it back, and this yarn has now been knit 4 times, which I think is a good testament to Quince & Company's quality, if you forgive all the cat fur that inevitably gets on everything. Then you can see that the yarn is still pretty happy. It doesn't seem to mind. Lark is a tightly spun 4-ply yarn, so that is definitely helping with its contribution with its sturdiness. I don't even know. This might be one of those episodes. But yeah, so 4th times the charm leg warmers. What I did for the second one, the pattern is top down, and that's what I did for the first one. But for the second one, I wanted to be able to try it on as I went and adjust the size accordingly, so I did it bottom up, and I don't know, I guess since I'd already followed the chart, and it's almost the same chart as the mittens, so I'm really used to it at this point, so it's pretty easy to just read the chart backwards. And then I cast on the amount of stitches that the pattern has for the ending, and I just kept trying it on. I started my increases much further up the back than the pattern calls for, but I ended up doing just about as many increases as the pattern suggests, so my stitch count was pretty much the same. Moth feels that she should be getting more attention than a silly leg warmer. That's her paw. Anyway, so if I just knit the pattern as written, then I would not have had any real issues. Hubris. So that's okay. I really enjoy knitting traveling stitches, or twisted stitches. So it was fun to knit, and hopefully I will start the second one here soon, and then I will be able to have ultimate matchy-matchy, which I love. I just think it's so fun to have super matching outfits. So I'm really looking forward to being able to match my leg warmers and mittens. Plus I have a hat in this color. I've also got this same color in fingering weight yarn, so eventually I'll have socks that match the leg warmers. It's gonna be exciting. I get excited about odd things. And you can kind of see, because it's ribbing, it doesn't show as much, but if I fold it like that, you can see that there's some calf shaping in there. And then once I finish the knitting of both of them, then I'll go ahead and embroider. I can show you the pattern. I have the book. The book is Vintage Modern Knits, which I borrowed from my library. And the pattern is the Innsbruck Mittens and Leg Warmers. And I have a correction to make. Last time I said that the Tyrolean tradition, which is what this is, the combination of embroidery and twisted stitches, was a German tradition. I am wrong. Thank you, Helga, for getting in touch with me and letting me know that Tyrol is in Austria, not Germany. So this is an Austrian tradition, and the book, in fact, does say this, so I'll read it to you quickly. These mittens take their name, the Innsbruck, from the capital of the western region of Austria, known as Tyrol, the other half of the historical Tyrolean region being Tyrol in northern Italy. They feature twisted stitch cables and embroidery in the style popularly referred to as Tyrolean knitting. The embroidered flowers on these mittens and leg warmers call to mind the wildflowers in bloom along the windswept Alps, which also inspired the intricately embroidered diurnal dresses that make up the historic women's costumes of the region. So, I'd forgotten to say that this pattern has fewer than 30 projects, and so it counts if you are doing the hipster knit along from Brooklyn Knit Folk that Jacqueline is running, so I plan to enter my set in there. Although I have definitely separated the mittens and leg warmers into 2 different projects, just so that I can track yarn usage and that kind of thing. This was a ripped out sleeve from the sweater, and it weighed 67 grams when I started, and I've just about finished the leg warmer. So I would say it took probably a little over 1 skein. They're sold in 50 gram skeins. But there will be specifics when I finish, because I always measure my yarn too. I just like details. So that is that project. And I have moved my basket to be next to me on the couch so that I don't have to reach so far. I'll show you one of the new ones next. It is not terribly entertaining, but that's okay. So these are socks that I'm knitting for my dad, and I finished the first one except for weaving in the ends. I have this superstition about not weaving in the ends until I've completely finished the project and know that I love it and I'm not going to frog it. So I never ever weave in ends as I go. I'm convinced that if I do, I'll end up having to rip it all out. I have no idea how I'm going to get all the cat fur off these socks before I send them to my dad, but we will try our best. So I have named this project The Most Interesting Socks in the World, which is obviously ironic. They are navy blue, which my dad requested. I had him go to Knit Picks because I'm using Stroll Fingering. and look at all the colors that it comes in and tell me which ones he wanted for socks, and he said either the navy blue or the hunter green. So as long as he likes these, he'll be getting hunter green socks at some point in the future. And yeah, it's just called navy. It's a dark navy. That's pretty accurate. And now I understand why knitters don't enjoy knitting with black yarn. I've never really knit with black yarn, and so I was like, okay, but even these, which are very simple socks, there have been points where I'm like, how am I going to pick up this drop stitch because I can't, it's just difficult to see. I make sure that I have good lighting right over my shoulder. I am not using a pattern for these. I decided to do a 1x1 ribbed cuff and then a 3x1 ribbed body because that seemed like it would be nice and comfortable. I knew I wanted to do a ribbed body, and I also knew that I wanted the cuff to be a different ribbing because I really like it when there's a visual demarcation between these two. So 1x1 and then 3x1 seemed a better option than trying to do 2x2 down here and then something weird up here, or vice versa. And I did the German twisted cast on because I wanted them to be really stretchy because my dad has sturdy calves. And this is an 80 stitch sock. So my dad wears a size 11 wide. I have not knit socks for him before. A US men's 11 wide, which doesn't sound that large, except since they're wide, his feet are the same circumference as a US men's 14. So I was trying to decide between 76 and 80 stitches because according to my little size chart, 76 stitches made more sense, but if I was getting 8 stitches to the inch, but my gut was telling me to go with 80 stitches. So I decided that since I was doing it ribbed, I would go with 80 stitches, especially for the leg, because as I said, my dad has sturdy calves. He enjoys running and CrossFit and that kind of stuff. So, so I did go with the 80 stitches here because I figured that ribbing is going to snug it up. And then when I was doing the gusset decreases for the heel, I went down to 76 stitches for the foot. So that's how I sorted that out. I don't know if you can tell, but I am doing anatomical toes. So there's more decreases on the pinky side than the big toe side. And that's because I recently tried this for a pair of socks for me, and I really like how it fits. And my dad and I have very similarly shaped toes. So I thought he would really like it too. And it provided something to distinguish these from store-bought socks. These look so much like store-bought socks to me, and especially my father was a career Air Force man, so these look like his uniform socks. It kind of makes me laugh. I feel like I'm a woman in World War II knitting away on the home front or something. So he does have almost flat feet. He has a very low arch, so I was thinking about doing a short row heel, but I just really like how heel flaps and gussets fit. And when I asked on Instagram, I think it was Mars said that she has a low arch, but she still prefers the heel flap and gusset. So I decided to go with that. Also, I wanted these to not look identical to store-bought socks, and I've never seen store-bought socks that have the heel flap and gusset. But I did only do 36 rows in the heel flap, which is not very many. When I'm knitting for my mom or myself, we have higher arches, so I usually do almost as many rows actually. So, and then I think I used the rounder heel. I'm gonna have to remember that soon. There's this great chart on a website, and I'll have the link to it in the project page, that gives you all these different types of heels, and the chart has it for all these different stitch counts. So you can just look up your stitch count and then follow those directions for the heel. And my dad has pretty wide heels, so I know that I opted for a wider one than I would do for my feet, because my feet have narrow heels and then a wide toe box. Let's see, I think that that's everything. I did go ahead and put a little purl bump right at the beginning of the toe, which just for added interest, but these are definitely very simple socks. The matryoshka is just marking where the heel began on the first sock, so that I could match it for the second. And with the second one, I have just begun my heel flap. So what I did was for the first sock, I just measured, and when it was the right length, then I started the heel flap. Oh, I'm sorry, Moth. Moth has apparently decided she doesn't want to be in my lap when I'm throwing knitting around. Anyway, and then to make the second sock match, I count rounds. So I had 76 rounds between the cuff and the heel flap. And I will leave that marker in place and add one to this sock so that then I can count the rows between here and beginning the toe. So I hope to finish those soon. It's nice to have something to knit when I'm reading or hanging out with friends, that kind of stuff. A lot of this leg was knit at a friend's birthday dinner on Saturday. So I'm not going to complain. I've never knit socks for him before, as I said, and I'm really hoping that he likes it because he's one of those people who's really difficult to buy gifts for because he has very expensive tastes or he buys himself what he wants, which is fine, but it does make gift-giving occasions tricky. So if he ends up liking hand-knit socks, then that is a solution. And I love knitting socks, so knitting 80-stitch ones doesn't bother me at all. It's basically knitting a sleeve, which I also love to knit. I wasn't sure about yardage, so I did buy 3 skeins of the yarn, but I finished this one with, I think, 3 or 4 grams left from the 50-gram skein. So it's nice to know that future pairs of socks, he should only need 100 grams of yarn, assuming he doesn't want them longer. I can't imagine he would want them longer. This is pretty much, you fold it in half matching, which I think is standard for socks. Now for the Songbird Cardigan, which you saw on the last progress snapshot. I have to admit, I have been neglecting this project shamefully. So I have knit both the front pieces except for the waistbands, which I want to do last because I haven't decided what to do them yet. Oh, and they look so lovely, but I have not cast on for the back yet, and I finished the front piece, I don't know, the second front at least a week ago, probably more. I've even wound up the next skein of the purple yarn, so I really have no excuse. Well, I do have a reason, not an excuse. I mean, the thing is that knitting is for pleasure, so I didn't feel like knitting on it, and therefore I didn't make myself because instead I should wait until I'm in the mood for it. I've been in the mood to read more than knit lately, so plain knitting has been getting more done, and then I just haven't wanted to do a lot of the complex thinking that usually I love with knitting, but lately I've just not wanted to fuss with that. So that's why also patterns, you know, like the leg warmers where I'm following a different pattern, someone else's pattern, have been getting more time. But I have been thinking a lot about this in the last few days, and I think that I am going to get back into it. I think I'm going to sit down today and sort out what I need to so that I can cast on the back. And as you can see, at some point I thought I should take out the provisional cast on and put it on a needle so that I could experiment with waistbands, but I've decided not to do that because I'm still going back and forth on how I want the bottom of the cardigan to look. In case you have not seen it before, the purple yarn is Quince & Company Finch in Damson. Finch is their 100% wool fingering weight yarn, and it's another tightly spun 4-ply, so it's like the finer equivalent of Lark. And this beautiful variegated yarn is Sweet Sparrow Yarns. Julie is an indie dyer on her Hummingbird base, which is 50% silk, 50% merino, and it's not superwash. And this is the More colorway. So, and the pattern is the Nightingale sock pattern, so I've taken the charts from it and I'm adapting it into a sweater. So this is from that sock pattern. This, which is only half of the flower chart, is from the sock pattern, and then this middle one is from Alice Starmore's Fair Isle Knitting. I needed to figure out a way to incorporate some waist shaping, bust shaping into it, so hence why I found a more narrow one. So the reason why I slowed way down once I finished these two, and obviously I'm knitting this flat even though it's in stranded color work, which is a little more fiddly, but really not that much more fiddly, so I decided it was worth it since I'm only using 2 colors, because that way if I ever want to like reclaim the yarn, I will be able to do so, whereas if I had knit it steeped, I'd have been committed. So I really like being able to reclaim yarn. Although this is so beautiful, I can't imagine wanting to rip it out. But you never know. Okay, focus. So I'm planning to do a pretty wide button band in the front because this sweater is inspired by 18th century dresses. And they had the lacing, well, they had stomachers. They always had a front panel, essentially. It depended on the decade as far as what the front panel was doing, but there was always something there. So I thought having a wider button band in a corrugated rib that is 1 knit and 2 purl would kind of look like lacing, and I thought it would be really neat. And so that's great, except of course the back isn't going to have a button band, so I can't just do the exact same thing that I did on the fronts on the back, because then the back would be 2 inches, which is 5 centimeters smaller than the fronts, and then the cardigan would be too tight. Because these charts are pretty complex, even though I'm knitting it at 8 stitches to the inch. So that's 16 stitches that I have to find a place for. And then the other issue is that since the birds will be facing each other on the front, or on the back, sorry, and you want them as close as possible, you don't want a lot of dead space, so I'll actually be taking at least 1 stitch out of the chart. Plus I won't have this stitch, which runs along and will be picked up. Sorry, you guys can't see. Okay, so I'm removing 2 stitches from each of the bird charts. So really I have to add 20 stitches to the back. Which is actually, and so this bird chart, it's a paid for pattern, but I don't think I'm giving away too much to say. This is 35 stitches. And this floral chart, which I've cut in half, so this will be the side seam and the other half will be on the backs, is 33 stitches. So neither of those quite work. Plus, it would be awkward. Like, I couldn't just add a floral chart in the middle because then I'm breaking up the birds. And then this chart right here is, I think, 14 stitches. So that is why I just haven't wanted to think about where I'm going to add those 20 stitches to the back and how I'm going to fiddle with it and that kind of stuff. So that's why I haven't cast on the back yet. But as I said, I am starting to get more into the mode of wanting to really think about and analyze my knitting, and I have a few ideas swirling around as far as things that I could do. So I think that perhaps tonight that will all come together and I will finally be able to cast on for the back of this sweater. The other reason why I've been putting it off is because, as I said, I'm knitting this flat, which does add a level of fiddliness to it. Although this chart is surprisingly easy to knit flat, I was very relieved to find. But the other thing is, I'm using 3 different charts. And of course they're mirrored. So the back is going to involve 6 different charts. Oops, that's backwards. But you know what I mean. The birds are facing opposite directions. And I even mirrored these leaves. And so the idea of having to knit the back with 6 different charts, and I don't print the charts out, I look at them on my phone. So when I need a new chart, I have to swipe. So with these, I was swiping. I managed to get myself to memorize this one, but I was still swiping a couple times and then swiping again. So that's the other reason why I've been like, maybe we don't want to do that. But I think I'll only have to swipe between the charts because I can just read each chart backwards and that will mirror it as well. So that will help as far as making it less fiddly. But the back is definitely going to be the most epic part of this project. But I love the front so much. I really want this to be a finished cardigan. And then I'm going to do 3/4 length sleeves. So once I get the back in place, things should move a lot more quickly. But in the meantime, my little songbirds have been pretty neglected. I have one more project to show you. This might actually be a pretty short episode. I'm pleasantly surprised because usually I manage to run on and on forever. And it is another garment. So this is the first piece of the bodice for what is going to be my very first knitted dress, which I'm really excited about, but I'm showing you the back. So here's the front. The color is this really beautiful plum color, so, and then it's probably going to be too bright because I put it close to the screen, but you can see the variation there. This is hand-dyed yarn by October House Fiber Arts, she has the most beautiful color sense. I have one of her 4-ounce fiber braids on my wall as a wreath, one of the variegated ones. I definitely recommend using fiber as wreaths because it's cheap. I mean, compared to most wreaths, I think it costs $20, $22, and it's easy to hang up on the wall, and I haven't had any problems, knock on wood, with moths. Okay, back to this. So this is a discontinued base, which was her Arbor fingering base, and it's 100% BFL, which is blue face luster, and it's 490 yards in a skein, and I have 3 skeins. I received this for Christmas 2 years ago. I had just finished knitting myself a sweater out of BFL Sport from Blue Moon Fiber Arts, and I loved it. And so when I saw that she had a base, I put it on my Christmas wish list, and my parents got it for me, which is incredible. I wouldn't be able to afford this on my own. And it's kind of sat in my stash. I was planning to do a lace sweater because I thought the 2-ply BFL would just look really nice in lace patterns, but I hadn't gotten around to it. And then this past winter, I went to wear my BFL Sport sweater, and I found that it was prickling me. I had worn it a lot the season before, but my skin has become more sensitive, and I can no longer wear it as a sweater. So I'm actually planning to unravel that and make it into a cowl. But in the meantime, I had this really nice yarn in my stash that, my parents had generously given to me, and I didn't know what to do with it because I had 1,470 yards, which yards are almost the same as meters. You guys, you metric people can figure it out. Yards are a little smaller than meters, I think. Yes. Anyway, and so I thought that maybe I should do a stole, like a really large one, like the scarf that I showed as the finished object in the last one, and then do a matching hat or accessories or whatever. So that was in the back of my mind. Meanwhile, I came across this pattern for a little girl's dress called Winter Garden. And I came across it actually because the designer has a knitting blog, and she had done a tutorial on that Anna Zilberg button band that I tried out on my linen cardigan that was really fun to knit, even if I ended up pulling it out. And so while I was on her blog, I kind of poked around, and I just fell in love with this dress. And it's a pinafore style dress or a jumper style dress, depending on where you live. So it's sleeveless, and it's designed to be layered over some kind of top. And it has a fitted bodice, and then a flared skirt, and then there's color work around the bottom, like about that much of a band of color work around it. And I just thought it was so lovely. And the pattern is written all the way from, I think, 1-year-old to 7-year-old. And of course, I'm larger than a 7-year-old. But I messaged the designer to ask about yardage so that I could kind of get an idea. She didn't have the yardage specified for the different sizes. And we got into a bit of a conversation. She seems really nice, and she seems like she is also a knitting nerd, which I love. And so I decided that I was definitely going to try to knit this dress, probably in Knit Picks Palette, which is a very affordable yarn, just so that I could figure out the yardage. And I really love the Knit Picks Heathered colorways. And because it's not going to touch me, it doesn't matter if the yarn is a little bit higher micron count. And actually, when I first saw the dress, I thought that would be perfect for Alice Darmore Hipperdine 2-ply, which is, I love that yarn. I think it's so beautiful, but I cannot wear it right next to my skin, which rules out anything with sleeves for me. But that yarn it's not super pricey, but it's expensive enough that I don't want to have to buy a lot more than I need. And I would definitely have to save up to do a dress in that, but that's in the future. So I had that in the back of my mind, and I was going to order from Knit Picks Palette. And then I started to wind this yarn up because I really want to use it this autumn. It's sat in my stash long enough. And I realized that I have so much yardage of it that I could probably use it as the main color for the dress. So I got excited and I bought the pattern, and I went ahead and did what I hope is the proper math. Usually I'm pretty confident in my knitting math skills, but I've never tried to estimate yardage before. So what I did was I worked out how many square inches was in the 6 to 7-year-old size dress, because there's no waist shaping and it's a gathered skirt. It's not a circle skirt. So that math was easy. And then I worked out how many square inches I would want in my dress, you know, lengthening the bodice, widening it at points, but I also do waist shaping, so I had to do a trapezoid area instead of a rectangle, and then adding a bit to the skirt as well. And so then I divided the number of the yardage that was required for the 6 to 7-year-old dress. I divided that amount of yards by the square inches to get how many yards each square inch should need, and then multiplied that by my square inches to hopefully get my estimated yardage for the main area. Hope that makes sense. And I will report back as to whether that works or not, but according to that, I should be perfectly fine using this. The 6 to 7-year-old size calls for 3 skeins of Brooklyn Tweed Loft, which is a fingering weight yarn, and there's 275 yards. So that dress, she doesn't specify how much you should expect to have left over, so I just assumed it would take all 3 skeins, which is, what, 825 yards. So I think according to my calculations, I should be using either 1,400 or 1,350, somewhere around that, of this yarn. But because I'm not 100% sure, I decided the dress pattern is knit from the hem of the skirt up. I decided I would knit my bodice first, and then knit the skirt top down, because that way if I start to run out of the main color, I can just do more color work on the bottom. And I will talk more about the bodice piece when I start my next segment. And I'm going to be using the same gauge that her pattern calls for, which is 7 stitches to the inch. And the ball band for this yarn suggested 6 to 7 stitches per inch on size 1s. So first I swatched on size 1s, but my gauge was much tighter, which surprises me. Usually I'm a loose knitter. So then I went ahead and swatched on US 2.5s, which I think is metric 3.0, maybe? My needles aren't labeled. I don't know why I'm looking at that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And that got me gauge in the stockinette portion. Her bodice is done in this really lovely fluted rib pattern, which is a slip stitch pattern, and it's really fun to knit. I enjoyed it on both of the swatches, and I really like how it looks unstretched. And in the pattern, she says that it's up to you. This is, oh, come on. There we go. This is the side that she uses in the pattern, but as she points out, the wrong side is just as attractive, and she suggests that you can use whichever one you like more. So I like them both in this form. However, I am not going to be knitting the dress bodice with 2 inches of positive ease the way that the children's sizes are written. And once you stretch it, I think you really lose the pattern, especially on this side. So I tried to make this work anyway, and I tried the bodice twice, and both times it just didn't quite look good, because I'm going to knit it with 0 inches of ease, so it's not going to be any negative ease, but I'm also not going to have extra room, and that's because I like a very fitted bodice if I'm going to do a poofy skirt. And of course it'll be 0 inches of negative ease before I take into effect whatever I'm layering under it. So I don't know if I were wearing a poofy dress or a poofy blouse under the dress, and that might affect it. And I wasn't starting the dress because I was stressed out about how I was going to adapt this and what was it going to look like and what if I ended up not liking it, and all that kind of stuff. So finally I decided, you know that you want this dress, so just pick a different ribbing pattern. And Letty and I have been, she's knitting the Skype sock pattern, which reminded me that I had done a sock in a different pattern by the same designer, these Skype rib socks, and I loved it. It was a gift knit from my grandmother. And so I decided to just go ahead and use that ribbing for my bodice because it's really pretty. See, so pretty. And it's really fun to knit. It's really simple and not at all fiddly. And oh, the other factor was I wasn't really sure how I was going to increase in pattern in the fluted rib, and I like to put my increases from the waist, I like to put them in the center as well as on the side, so it kind of matters that I make them look good as they increase. And this pattern is basically 2x1 rib with some fancy stuff added, so I knew I'd be able to increase pretty easily. So I started that, and then it was really easy for me to do my provisional cast on and get started. And I am pretty much up to where I need to start the armhole shaping already on this first half. Now, usually I would say this is the front half. However, the way the pattern is written, the buttons are in the back, which makes sense for kids. And I think I'm going to make the dress reversible. So I'm going to have a lower neckline on one side, probably the button side, and then a higher but still scooped neckline on the other side so that I can wear it with either, you know, a scooped back and the higher neckline in front and the buttons on the back, or the other way around. So I'm just calling this the first half. And I really love how the shaping turned out. If you're wondering what this frill is, that's just part of the pattern. So there's like 3 rows that you do before you start the bodice ribbing. There we go. And obviously when I'm wearing it, it will be stretched out because I did 0 inches of ease based on my stockinette gauge. So that closed is obviously a bit too much. And I'm thinking that I'll add a couple more stitches to the back, or to the one piece, the solid piece, so that there's a little less, or a little bit of positive ease just because of ribbing. But it's super stretchy. It's stretched to the measurements I need it to without any problems. And since it's BFL, I think it'll wear really well and also drape really nicely in the skirt, so I think it's really well suited to a dress. The yarn, sorry, okay. So this is where the bust shaping started there. And the way that I decided to do that, increasing in pattern, as I said, it's a knit 2, purl 1 base. So first I added a purl stitch because purl stitches are less visible. So that's here, and I was increasing every 10th row, so I had to make sure that everything looked good without increases. And then I added the first knit stitch, and I worked that as a twisted knit up because I thought that that would look better and more in line with this patterning that's happening. And then I got to the 2 stitches, and I could start treating it in pattern. However, because I actually was increasing 6 stitches on the interior, so the first one starts down here, and this is one of those patterns where you're treating the columns separately. The design is staggered, so you'll be doing this slipping. It's a free sock pattern, by the way, so you can go see for yourself. But as you can see, you do pattern, plain, and then you alternate. So I was increasing 2 columns, so once I was done with all the increases, it would still be perfectly in pattern. But when I just had the 1 column done, I had to decide which part I was going to match. So what I decided was to go ahead and alternate it with the column that it would always be living next to, which means that I worked it the same way as, sorry, it's really difficult for me to see on the screen. Okay, so I will look at it and then make sure. That's the second one again. So here. See how instead of alternating, I've got two that are decorative right next to each other? And that's because I knew that I would be growing the second 3 stitches, so the second motif, in between these two. So once that motif grew up, it would be able to divide them. And then down here, this column, which is the first of the new ones that I added, is always going to sit next to this one. So I thought it was more important for this to alternate with this one. The side shaping was easier because you can just treat it the opposite of whatever one it comes after. You know, you're not sandwiching it in. So that's all I needed to do there. And I did go ahead and put, so there's 9 stitches increase on the side and only 6 in the middle, and that was so that I could keep that pattern even. So the 9 stitches on the side make 3 columns, but that's okay because it's a side seam. And I'll just make sure when I'm knitting the back piece that I plan for that so that when they meet up, they will still all look sensible. I hope that made sense. It's difficult to talk about increasing and decreasing in pattern because so much of it is instinctive, but I thought that it would be useful to try to analyze it a little better. Let me know if you found that useful. I hope that you enjoyed my discussion of my works in progress. The only thing that remains is to recommend a few podcasts that I have been enjoying lately. First up is Dunkelgrün, which is by Anna, an Austrian who lives in Switzerland, and she is very interested in natural dyeing. She is also a chemist by profession and training, and so she includes discussions in her podcast about the chemistry of knitting, which are just wonderful. I really like that as a nerd. It appeals to me a lot, and she does all kinds of interesting projects. She tends to modify them, and she talks in detail about those modifications. So you get a lot of educational and interesting knitting content. She seems really nice and has a very calm, soothing voice and a nice setup. Her lighting and focus and stuff is always really good. So I'm sure that you will enjoy her, and thank you so much to the viewers who recommended that I give her a try. Then there is the Knitting the Stash podcast, which is also on YouTube, and that is by Melissa, who lives in Illinois. She's a college professor, and her podcast is not the same format as kind of the typical knitting project diary format, which is what I think of as the default for podcasts and what I do. Instead, she tends to organize her episodes more by theme, and while she does show you projects that she's been working on, they tend to fit into a larger picture, or it's just a different format, and I really enjoy it. It's nice. She is very thoughtful and brings a very precise kind of researched approach to things and a nuanced. It feels like it's a philosophy of knitting podcast, which is really neat. She talks a lot about place-based yarn and that kind of aesthetic and basically knowing where your materials are from, and then she also talks about how she matches yarn to different projects. So it's just a very interesting, thoughtfully done podcast. And as I said, that one is also on YouTube. And finally, there is an audio podcast called Imagine Landscapes, which is by Sarah and Katie, who are sisters living in the Canadian prairie. And they have been podcasting for about a year. They podcast every other week, and a lot of times their episodes are on the longer side, which is really exciting for me as someone who goes through audio material really quickly. So I had a blast catching up with all of their podcasts. I was kind of binge listening to them because they're just really fun to spend time with. They tend to make each other laugh, which of course makes me laugh, and I just really enjoy the interaction you get when a podcast has 2 people instead of 1 person. They knit all kinds of projects, and they talk about details, and they analyze their knitting, which, you know, I love. And then they also talk about some general life stuff that sneaks in, and that's always really interesting too, even when it's things like board games that I have never tried myself. I just really enjoy how they discuss different things, and it's nice to hear that sister bond. I have a sister who I'm quite close to myself, and she is not a knitter, but if she was, I would be browbeating her into doing an audio podcast with me because she lives in Texas, so we wouldn't be able to do a video podcast in person. So I just really, really enjoy spending time with them and hearing all about their knitting and how funny and confident they are. I really like that. Oh, and also they tend to describe things as cunning a lot, which I think is great. I've decided I need to start using that word more. So those are 3 more podcasts for you to watch if you have more time and are looking for more things to enjoy while you're knitting. This is Thistle. Moth has gone over to the chair opposite, so it would be too difficult to pick her up. I don't think she likes my new tradition of forcing them into camera view, whereas Thistle will put up with more stuff, being a dog. So this is Thistle and I saying goodbye for now, and I look forward to catching up with you next week. As always, I'm the Charm of It on Instagram and Ravelry, as well as here on YouTube, and I love to hear from you. So feel free to leave comments and thumbs up and all those kinds of things. I really appreciate it when you take the time to get in touch. Bye!